Hello, everyone, and welcome to the final panel of the day, Founders' Perspectives on Generative AI. Nice to see that you haven't gone to the pub yet. This is a good start. I know that it can be tempting about this time on a Friday. So really excited to present this panel and moderate this panel today, and I'm joined by three amazing founders, all who are building in the sort of AI space. So going from left to right, we have Joe from Deducta. Deducta is a AI to basically provide transparency over your spend data for global procurement teams. Layla from Jure, and Jure is an AI for judicial insights. And finally, Jeff from Odyssey, a company working at the intersection of AI and computer graphics for Hollywood-grade AI visual effects. So why should we ask founders about their perspectives on generative AI? We are all slightly delusional in that we think that we can build something and exit it, even though the odds are stacked against our favor. And we often disregard the rules, but that, I think, may show where AI might go in the next few years. So I'm going to start off by sort of asking why we're here. Is it even worth us spending our time delineating between AI and software when the two are becoming one, it seems. So yeah, is that a worthwhile delineation, do you think? Or I'll let you, I know we started this conversation upstairs, Jeff, and it was very interesting, so I'll let you sort of take it first.
Sure. Hey everyone, it's great to see you all. So on the question, I would say it's increasingly difficult to do software without some form of AI these days. And in many respects, AI is software, right? We started with fundamental predicate logic in terms of how we build AI systems, and it's simply advanced to a state where we use more probabilistic models in terms of how we do it. I see them, frankly, as just being very, very tightly enmeshed, but frankly, it's how we do computing. There's slightly different flavors of it, but I would say they're increasingly enmeshed. Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, hi, I'm Joe. Obviously was just introduced. I think we also have not a different perspective, but we've got a talk we often give called the if statement is dead. Now, if anyone's done any coding, you all know that if statements or for loops are basically all we ever do, especially at the beginning, and then we get a little more sophisticated. But what we've thought is AI and large language models really allows you to replace the building blocks of code fundamentally. And there is a whole host of new applications that brings. On a technical level, we can talk later or approach me afterwards, but the way we describe it is before, you only had a vector, you would check if the word hey is somewhere, and now you can check semantically. Is it bonjour, ça va, something related to it, and go and do analysis and IntelliJ from there.
And I think the only thing I would add is these are still probabilistic, and there are situations in which you do somewhat want a deterministic output. And there are things that are going on in the AI world that are trying to move towards that, like structured outputs and things like that, and there are guardrails that you can put in place. But it is important to keep in mind that there are certain applications where you really do want a deterministic output, and we're not there yet, but we'll probably be on our way there.
Yeah, thanks very much. And I think that's something that I wanted to sort of ask my next question is, okay, if there is this difference where typically with software we're used to seeing this, when I run this function, I get a response in this format. And with large language models, whilst we're sort of trying to get there as much as possible, that we often don't get the output. The output we receive is a probability, so we can't be certain what the output we're going to get is. So as founders, when you're building your AI products, I guess you might sometimes find yourself saying to investors or potential customers, I can build something that solves your problem roughly right, and it's not quite perfect. So how do you approach that as founders that when you're building AI products, that output and the end deliverable might actually be something which you can't say with any degree of 100% certainty will always answer the client or the investor's sort of problem that they're looking to solve?
Yeah, I can start for us. For us, it's really important to break it down into each individual step in the process. So you don't want to just check the output, the end. You want to look at every single point in our process what do we need and what are we getting? And then hopefully by doing that, when you don't get the output that you need or you're not confident in the output that you can have technology built in, fail safes, so that when that happens, you restart or you reevaluate or you pivot to something else. So I think having a good understanding internally of what that looks like for your company and for your tech stack is really key to make sure that what you then hand over to a client or somebody on your team is actually the right thing that you can have confidence in.
Yeah. I think there's a few different levels you can look at this. So as a company, you can basically pick areas where it's easier to tolerate failure. So maybe as an example, in our world at Odyssey, we're essentially a group of former self-driving industry people. And our former world is dealing with probably one of the hardest problems of productionizing visual AI in a safety critical setting. And that last statement is really what makes it so difficult, because you cannot afford failure. I mean, it's existential for many reasons. In our new world, you can think of this as relaxing that constraint. So as a company, what you can do is you pick your battles. So if we're dealing with virtual environments, but not necessarily trying to use it in a safety critical application, it's a much better place to build a company, particularly in this early phase while the technology is still being built, things are very imperfect, you're working out what your product is. So that's kind of the strategic decision you can make about what company you're building and how you adapt accordingly. There's kind of a layer at the system level of how you can deal with the probabilistic nature as well. I think a lot of people think about the model in isolation. People often talk about the model. I think it's a better way to think about it as a system, where it's might be one or many machine learning models. You may be using them to critique each other. You may be putting boundary conditions around it. And if you design the technology stack that way, you can accommodate some of these problems more effectively. It's not perfect, and it's often very use case dependent, but that would be how I would generally advise people to try to manage probability.
For us, first of all, I really agree with what you were saying with breaking down the problem. The one thing I'd also add is making sure that there's a rationale on why each step was taking, so that anyone can read back and see the decision tree, essentially. But also, what kind of problems to tackle. Where we've gone down is problems where you don't need to be perfect. Even better, that were before not possible, so we're starting at 0, so getting to 80% is fantastic. No one cares about the last 20 in the first year. There are some specific use cases. We spoke that we do a bit in procurement. If I'm running an RFP process and there are 5 companies who we select as being competitors in our supply chain, and we want to consolidate that, if one wasn't quite perfect, does not matter, because there are 4 that we've identified that you didn't know about before. And that already has huge amounts of value. The same on sales side, and generally the last keywords we always leave with customers is business process first, software second. So find a business process that are always imperfect and automate that in a way, or get some knowledge and data and enrich those business processes.
Nailed it, and thank you for explaining why there's no waiting list for AI dentists. I think speaking to founders, one thing that I noticed that it's a brilliant problem to have is that you start with this blank slate and you can go and tackle any problem that you like, and it's a great leveler in the sense that you have access to the same resources as everyone else, and that's also starting out, and that's actually very little because we don't have data and we have access to the same sort of building blocks, same software packages as everyone else, and that has led to a large amount of pressure on founders to explain what their moat is. And to have a strategy for defining their moat, particularly when, the data that they're able to use commercially has to be open source, and so therefore anyone else can access it. How do you answer that question when you're asked it? I'm sure you get it a lot, because I know that it's a very prevalent question. So how do you answer that, and how do you go about sort of building your moat? And you can keep your secrets if you need to.
I think technologically, you can build a 6-month advantage, maybe a year, but no matter how big you are, that's about as far ahead as you'll get before there'll be someone who can do what you can do. And so we really focus also on the answer of People still do business with other people and they still need to trust you, and habits can be formed. And there are stickiness to a product that is beyond just a simple 2% bump in accuracy. An example I always give is Claude, or Opus, the new model they brought out, was for a few months or a month or so better than ChatGPT, but how many people actually switched? Not that many. The reason is because everything's moving forward faster than we as a human can adapt. So as long as it's all moving forward, our customers are like, look, you're currently ahead, and if you keep with this momentum, we will always stick with you.
I think another thing to keep in mind is oftentimes the data is shared. People can access that data. It is unstructured, and unstructured data is a hefty hill to climb. Everybody's going to process data differently. It's going to lead to a unique data set in terms of how they can actually then use the data that they have. And then when you kind of go through the first iteration of your product with whatever data it is that you have, you'll have a better sense of what other data might be out there that's not easily accessible, that either you need to create or you need to find a way to access. And so I think you just build from maybe a common starting point, and you're the same on day one, but by day 1,000, you're looking at a totally different trajectory just based on the decisions that you've made at every key data point.
I think we're probably a bit of an unusual case in that I don't think we've actually had that question. But given my background and what we do as a company and all our respective strengths, like we make our own data. So in many respects, it was very obvious to us in terms of talking to investors or customers or anything like that, that it was obviously a core intrinsic strength of who we are as a team and in terms of what we're good at. You can't download a data set about self-driving on the internet. Like, it doesn't exist. So the world I've lived in is one where you had to go and create that yourself. So from that perspective, I guess it's really shaped how we think. I do think sometimes more on the model building side of things, people overestimate the cost of data acquisition and underestimate the cost of training, as in the amount of GPU cycles you'll be using for training these large models. It isn't that hard or expensive to go and gather data yourself or put that effort in. It's just not necessarily the natural reaction of some folks. But I guess if you had lived self-driving for a while, it's sort of a natural starting point. So go and get more data.
And of course, you don't even need humans to make data anymore with approaching sort of synthetic data generation. The use of large language models to actually generate your own data, you can actually create some without having to go out and get thousands of transcripts of conversations or anything like that. And I thought your point as well, Layla, was really interesting. One thing that we see with sort of client projects is often when retrieval augmented generation apps are failing, if you go back and you look at how they're processing and chunking that data, it's often not being done in the most sort of context-aware way. And by revisiting that and looking at how you actually process that data, you can actually unlock performance gains, which are well away from the sort of the model. So yeah, really interesting points. Jeff, I think this is maybe a question for you. I know there's a big focus of yours is ensuring that what we build is, or what you build is safe and trusted, and I'm sure it's the same for everyone else on this panel. And often what's safe and trusted in the AI world can compete with sort of corporate and commercial ambition. So what is it that you do, and are you noticing a shift in the market to actually demanding those safe and trusted products quite a bit more than and the people that make a commitment to that?
In our world, the biggest concern we hear is more about copyright. Essentially, it's this sort of notion of IP or ownership of data. It's a very open space from what I can tell. I will say I'm not a lawyer, so please do not consider this any kind of recommendation or advice. My bet is that it's likely that the AI this embracing of fair use as a concept is ultimately where we will land as a society. The reason I say that is there's nothing stopping me breaching copyright. Copyright is a relatively well understood concept. I can go and download existing tools and make something that infringes on Disney's copyright. I'm going to get a very angry letter from their lawyers. And there's nothing stopping people doing this with AI tools today. So for us, that's kind of the main concern. The way we're going about addressing that is making sure that we're very open with potential customers about what has gone into data. We built data provenance from day zero. And we've also made sure that all of the data, we can stand behind the data that we've used in training models. I think that is a particularly unique case for us, given we're operating in the sort of the visual media space. But it might be somewhat similar for you, I think.
Yeah, so in the law world, it's a big thing in terms of safety and reliability and how you can actually trust what you're putting out. I think the key thing is evals are massive and they're underdone. There's now, I think, an increasing trend of a priority on evaluations and knowing internally how much you actually trust what your output is and finding ways to increase that, whether that's restricting to certain types of ground truth that you have absolute confidence in, wherever they may come from, or at least being able to give some kind of marker of this is how accurate we think this might be, and here's what you should and should not do with this kind of data. In the same way that if you hear something from a friend walking on the street, and if you read something in the New York Times, and if you read something in a textbook, you're going to treat all that information slightly differently. I think we just need to ground information that we get out of these systems in which one of those cases this information is, and take it as such.
We don't have the safety question that often, fortunately. We have the IP question a lot. That's very, very important for corporates, and especially to your point at the beginning and how you process your data. Of course, we can all be the same, but then the trajectory forward changes, and that's the reason why even if all corporates end up using ChatGPT or AI, you still have a USP and you still have know-how. It's not like we all become ChatGPT users. And for safety, the way we measure it is with rationales, explainability, decision trees, very simply, that you can understand the decisions that were made and you clearly define the outcomes that are unacceptable rather than the methods that are unacceptable.
I'm now going to start talking about IDEs, so I'm really sorry. An IDE is where a developer goes to write their code. And in our world, when we're building software products, it's basically like our factory where we build our products. And there has been a very big change in the last 12 months to IDEs, and due to them being augmented with AI. So just like you might go to ChatGPT, and obviously ChatGPT can write code for you, with some of the latest releases of these IDEs, they have a ChatGPT built in, and it sort of starts to write a significant amount of code for you. And this has been a bit of a game changer for a lot of developers. I mean, I can talk personally, and I'm about to out myself as what a terrible developer I am, but I'd say I only actually write about 20% of my code now, particularly in the sort of 0 to 1 stage for projects, and the rest is written by AI. And I think that it's reasonable to believe that this has some quite profound second-order effects on speed of iteration and development. So I wanted to ask sort of the panel, how have you seen any sort of second-order effects from that? Are you utilizing these tools within your own companies? And just what's your general opinion on if we extrapolate out these tools getting more and more powerful, will we be writing any code at all? And will anyone in this room be able to go on and be a software founder?
So one thing I definitely agree on is that there's time saved in especially like standard code blocks or standard building blocks that we all need, if statements and for loops. But on skill level, I've yet to see conclusive results that these IDEs or chatbots, ChatGPT, can build a solution that can scale and is production ready for lots of users to use. Ironically, the frustration has stayed the same. Now we are more efficient, but coding is still a lot of time going through and finding the errors and thinking actually architecturally, how do we need to build this for it to work well so that 100,000, 1 million, 10 million, 20 million data points users can use this thing and it still works well.
Yeah, so as a disclaimer, we have friends at Cursor and we love them and we use them and they're amazing, so just take everything I say with that in mind. We found it immensely helpful, so 2 to 4 times faster probably on our team using tools like this. Kind of to your point, something that we had been talking about earlier is differentiating between planning and implementation. And I think for implementation of ideas that you already have, if you have a good idea of the framework that you want to use and what you want kind of the building blocks to look like, they're amazing tools. But you still do need to have an understanding of what it is that you're trying to build, what your system looks like, and that planning side, I think, is still very much human dependent, but absolutely amazing tools. If you're doing front-end work, great asset to have, but there is still stuff that kind of the conventional software developer needs to do.
I would say we're probably fairly similar. We use all of these tools. Again, we're probably a little bit of an unusual case in that because we're more of a deep tech or frontier tech company. My experience is that they can solve boilerplate stuff for me, so simple like basic file handling and things like that. And it's basically really good as a fast autocomplete, but it's very limited for the more fundamental thinking because like many AI systems, it's very hard for it to create stuff that doesn't exist yet. So if you're trying to develop something that fundamentally does not exist in any research paper or any other sort of corpus that exists, it's going to struggle a bit. So it's definitely accelerant. I don't think we've quite seen the same benefits maybe as you have, but that's probably the nature of difference of work. But yeah, we're fans. We use GitHub Copilot. I think someone uses Cursor, and various folks use both Claude and OpenAI as essentially debugging tools.
I said I'd out myself for what a bad developer I am, so I'm glad that you did it.
We'll join you.
I think one thing is maybe potentially when we're using these AI tools, it's important to remind ourselves that maybe this is the worst version of this tool that we're ever going to use, and it's going to get a lot better. And what I often find is like you see things and you say to a client that you might be working with that, hey, I don't think that's technically feasible right now, and then you're proven wrong the very next day or even the next week. So I sort of see like an Overton window of what's technically feasible in this space, and it's constantly shifting and moving sort of further and further along, which makes building a product very difficult because you can build something and there might be a new thing that comes out next week and it makes all your work previously redundant. Or does it? So that's sort of my question to the panel. Does it make that work redundant? And how do you sort of keep up with the pace of this field when you're building a product in it? Because I know it can be incredibly challenging.
I don't. So for context, of our field is really what I call sort of AI or AI graphics and computer vision. The number of papers that comes out and that is kind of astronomical. We do have like a rolling database that we keep track of where people submit, mostly so we can kind of have a bit of an idea of what's going on. But if I'm honest, if I spent all my time reading them, I would never build anything. So I think there's a bit of a balance to be struck of where you devote your time. And it's very easy to get distracted by other folks and what they might be building, as opposed to building the thing that you think is necessary and beneficial. So the short answer is, well, that's a lie. I do, but I would say you have to temper it or you won't actually succeed.
Yeah, I think you also want to know where the gaps are in what you're building and what the opportunities are to fill those gaps. And that's, I think, the stuff that you want to spend the most attention on is we have this problem, we currently can't solve it with the technology that's out there, but hey, if somebody could do something like X, that's great, look out for it. And that's really where I think we spend a lot of our time is acknowledging what works well and what doesn't work, and then tailoring our kind of perception of the outside world accordingly.
I mean, yeah, and also what you guys were saying, I agree. It's new concepts and planning are always interesting. So you need to make sure that there's agentic workflows is a big thing. We've been working on it for a while, and now it's getting some steam. But those kind of thoughts of, okay, there's a new concept that's getting traction, and that is now the new state of the art. That you need to know. But the marginal gains you get from these papers, for us also, we see it as, ironically, when ChatGPT makes it boilerplate code, you have it integrated anyway, if that's what you're using for boilerplate stuff. And so we don't really worry about it. And the final bit I'll say is, it's been a long time since there's been any groundbreaking jumps in how we use AI. I mean, attention is all you need. This whole architecture is since 2017. So ChatGPT breakthrough was not a technological breakthrough, but more of a product breakthrough. And so those are the things we look out for more than fundamentally how things have changed.
Now that we're sort of getting even closer to pub o'clock, I thought I would start to bring out some questions that we might enjoy discussing at the pub. So what I wanted to ask is, what controversial opinion do you have about where AI is going to go and how it's going to progress over the next 5 years that people usually shout you down about? And now that no one can talk out of turn, you can finally get it out and tell the world.
I'm going to be really greedy and go for two. The first one, this whole big thing about an AI singularity, I just mentioned it. Until there's a real technological breakthrough, I don't see how AI comes up with original thought. I mean, fundamentally, until it can do that, we really reach some superhuman stuff. That being said, a lot of damage, or however you want to see it, there's a huge maturing technology, so big fan of it as it is maturing. But this whole doomsday thing, I haven't seen any evidence of it. And the second part is on the business side. Our big hypothesis and premise is, let's say, the words business process first, software second, and that you really define your outcome and your business process, and where the data is, if it's unstructured in multiple ERPs or CRMs, so on, is just not as important anymore, but very much, frankly, you don't even have these big migration things with Salesforce or SAP, but everything can stay decentralized and you define, what do I want to know? What is the outcome and what's the process to get there? And the AI will be the glue in between to get that information.
I think my controversial take comes from my background. So I'm a neuroscientist, and anybody that's done any bit of neuroscience knows that the brain is quite an imperfect machine. It's biased by whatever your lived experience is, and that's kind of what sets the internal workings of how you view the world and how you make decisions and how you think about things just based on what you've seen in your X number of years. And so I think there's a tendency to think that AI can replace all human tasks. It's AI for X, AI for Y. One day, do we need humans? But I think what we'll find is there is value in imperfection in some domains. So there are areas where you don't want something trained on everything, where there's an element of creativity and unique insight that comes out of the fact that you just happen to have seen slightly different data than your brother did, and your sister, and the friend that lives down the street, and somebody that lives in a different country. And so I think over the next few years, we're going to have to look at that landscape in a different way that we haven't before. We're going to start to see the things where we value human input and human thinking, and the places where maybe efficiency and optimization are key.
I think I probably have, well, one potentially spicy take. Or maybe two.
I think you have lots.
I probably have two. So I had the luxury of living through the self-driving era of the boom in the 2010s. And to me, there are so many parallels I see in how the industry is evolving, how people are talking about it, how investors are behaving. This reminds me of autonomous driving in 2014, is about where we are. So it's almost a decade removed. And I think in many respects, what has been, we can learn from that experience is, hype gets you so far, but equally you have to be able to deliver. And you have to be able to follow through. And there are companies that certainly have done so, and it's a result of a huge amount of work that has made this whole new technology possible. But right now, I think I don't know if we're pre or post-hype, but we're certainly firmly in the hype peak. But that is not to say that I'm not incredibly bullish about what is possible with this new algorithmic technology. I spent my more than 15 years working on this as a field. I think it's amazing what we're going to be able to do, but I think we're very firmly in the middle of a hype cycle. And secondly, and maybe as a concluding controversial take, I think AGI is to the AI industry what the trolley problem is to the AV industry. I think it's frankly an unhelpful distraction and doesn't diminish from the frankly amazing tech that can be built.
On that, I think I'll open up to the audience. And if anyone has any questions for our lovely founders, then feel free to ask away. I feel like we can do better.
If you're starting new companies based on creative technology, so like in fashion, if it's really going to change very fast, that technology, how would you think about your investment planning? Would you leave lots of room for new things coming
Yeah, I think I would work backwards. I think what is the greatest thing that you can imagine that you could build, and then work back to how you would build that. And then what are the big technological or technology hurdles that everybody else would need to solve for you to get there? Does it seem like it's going in that direction? I think if you're building technology and you don't benefit from advances from the companies around you or the companies that you're building on, you're not going to survive. I think you need to be able to kind of ride the wave of technological innovation, and so think in that way and think in that kind of long horizon of not building something for a month from now or a year from now, but you're building something for 5 or 10 years out. What does that look like? And what are those big breakthroughs, and how can I make sure that I'm there when they happen?
I'll give a really short answer. I mean, many caveats, but the ultimate answer, I think, is, like, to quote Bezos, of what's true tomorrow, a year and 10 years from now for my business. I mean, for him, it was people want delivery tomorrow and cheap prices. What's that truth for your company? And that should always be the majority of your investment and your attention. And the rest of the stuff is ensure you have the basic capabilities to be dynamic in the future. I mean, people talk about agile working and all that kind of stuff, but never overspend. We're from procurement and spend analytics, so please never overspend. Be careful what you spend your money on, and make sure that everything you spend helps in that outcome, helps in making sure what I am doing will help my company tomorrow, a year, and 10 years from now. Don't get caught up in the middle, because it's a bumpy ride, but as long as it goes up, you're kind of all right.
Yeah, go for it.
Maybe a slightly cheeky question. You made this comment that AI has not demonstrated any original thought. So what is it about Move 37 that you think did not constitute original thought, given Layla reaction to that?
Games are a tricky one, because in my eyes, I wouldn't quantify. You've got a clear set of rules, you've got a clear outcome that you're trying to achieve, and this is why it's a controversial take, right? You do a big generalized statement that can be easily disproven on the edge cases, but at least specifically for games and stuff like that, or how we define it with business processes, where there's a clear outcome, very much original thought in the way that you can come up with new ways of doing it and new insights and get huge gains and be better than any human. Completely agree with you. I think original thought is truly planning. When you're trying to come up with a creative solution, there is nothing new under the sun, but a creative solution applied in a way that no one had thought before. Even then, I always find if I try and do that with ChatGPT, it's me that comes up with it, and ChatGPT goes and fills out the ideas and goes criticizes it, and I can test it. But it doesn't come up with anything that bedazzles me on a daily basis.
Yeah, try getting a ChatGPT to name your startup. You can. Actually, the best case I've seen of an LLM naming a startup came organically through Notebook LM. So something that might be interesting for people to try, I think I've discussed this with a couple of other people earlier, was I put a load of customer interviews into Notebook LM, and then I just listened to a podcast about what business idea I should make off the back of it, and it came up with a name for one, and it was actually a really good name. And they made it as a joke in the podcast that it generated, but it was quite good. So yeah, might be worth trying. Yeah.
Over the past 2 days, we've heard a lot about the importance of industry-wide benchmarks, particularly when it comes to reliability, trust, et cetera, et cetera. As members of the industry, how would you like to see those benchmarks established, negotiated, and applied, and moderated?
So remember I said there's a lot of parallels with autonomous driving and the broader AI industry. It was about 2016 that everyone in AB realized that evaluation is the thing that is basically your rate limiting factor. So if I'm looking at parallels between industries, I think it's unlikely that it would be nice if all the companies were like, oh, here's how we define some tasks. But the reality is, if we're thinking about a generalized language model, it's a very open set problem, right? It's very unbounded in terms of what you actually want it to do. Again, I draw an analogy. What is good driving? Frankly, it's incredibly difficult to codify this. We can say what's bad. We can say A is better than B. But the breadth of topics, the breadth of environments, the breadth of diversity of things you have to be able to deal with is just hard. So as nice as it would be if there was a common benchmark, I think it's unlikely we'll see anything that is standardized across the industry, simply because it is too diverse. What is acceptable in culture A and maybe in the UK compared to another English-speaking country, US, for example. There'll be differences, right? And I don't think it's going to be tractable to codify that in a way that is realistic. That's not to say that companies don't have massive evaluation efforts going on. I haven't seen that much public discourse from the general LLM companies, but from friends and folks across the industry, I know that it clearly has become a topic in the last year, particularly in the last year. And I think that is only going to increase. As soon as you go closer to the product layer, actually you guys would probably be a great example, evaluation is basically a rate limiting factor of whether you survive as a company. Because if you can measure the output, you can probably make it better. But now you're talking about a very, very fine wedge of something it needs to do. So I think we'll see more proprietary evaluation standards. There might be some very specific ones within certain industries, but I don't know if there's enough commonality yet in the product layer to define what that looks like. I think we'll have to see over the next couple of years. Sorry, it was a bit of a verbose answer, but.
So I agree with everything you said on that, and especially from a technical perspective. I think also on a business perspective, common benchmarks for an industry on a first principles are used to try and sort, excuse my French, but bullshit away from real stuff. And that's really where we care about it is, and why AI is so cool, is the sophistication of buyers and sophistication of people who are using technology or wanting to use technology has gone up by so much, which is a real pleasure if you've actually got something substantive. And it allows you to differentiate yourself in a real way and not game a system. And that's where we also really love benchmarks that can help do that and orientate yourself around that. And when everyone knows the accuracy of Claude, it's a bit obscene that we all do, or have some ideas who's currently the most accurate on a random hug.
On one benchmark.
Exactly, on one random benchmark. But still, it's brand power and it's trust, and that's what I think is really important around it.
The only thing I'll add, which kind of relates to Jeff's comment, is it depends what you're trying to benchmark for, what subset of the product or task specifically that you're looking at. You can run something on a bunch of different tasks and get slightly different answers. So the question is, what is it that you care the most about? Is it misinformation? Is it making sure that data sources are correct? Is it performance on whatever the task is that you're doing, which might be relevant in one startup but not necessarily relevant in another startup in the same industry? So I think that there might be safety benchmarks and evals that will be domain specific, but kind of the standard for law or business or finance or what have you. But I think ultimately the majority of kind of benchmarking and evals will be internal to optimize for whatever it is that the specific company cares the most about.
Yeah, go for it.
So I had a question about algorithmic innovation and where you think the value will be generated in the next few years. So I mean, I can think of a few different points that we've passed to get here. First the transformer, which as you say is quite an old piece of technology really, but that architecture is obviously very important to all of this stuff. And scaling that up is one sort of leg of the value generation. Mainly done by very large companies, of course, but those will feed out to your products, I'm assuming. And then there's new training regimes, sort of like reinforcement learning, human feedback, and then more recently, I guess, it's just getting various copies of these things, having them talk to each other, sort of, meta structure that you use the models for, and how you sort of plumb them together to get whatever output you've got. And maybe there's some other regime that you might want to talk about. But I was wondering where you see value in the next few years for your companies and elsewhere being generated from these sort of algorithmic innovations.
I can say a small piece on that actually, and just in terms of, I think ChatGPT, that was mentioned to earlier, was ultimately a UI innovation with RLHF as well. There's a lot of companies cropping up that are using very intelligent technology and wrapping it as a chatbot, and I find that incredibly lazy. We don't want to think we're lazy ourselves, so we don't want to go into the effort of writing and trying to squeeze the best out of these algorithms. I think actually a lot of performance gain will come over the next 5 years, and actually finding the right way to present this information and their capabilities back to us in a frictionless way so that we can take that action without, and use their intelligence of whatever algorithm comes over the next 5 years, but without having to think through the perfect prompt to get the right email response to my boss. So I think a large amount is actually going to come on the UI side in the next few years, because we're still sort of replicating ChatGPT for our domains at the minute, which I think is, yeah, we can be more imaginative than that, I think.
I can share sort of some thoughts on more from a perspective of computer vision. And so my background is more computer vision and policy learning. So think of this as interpreting high-dimensional sensor data and working out what to do about it. So decision making. I'll maybe address those a little bit independently. So computer vision as a field is pretty mature. Like we understand 2D representations pretty well. It's mostly a data problem in that regard. We're getting better at self-supervised learning, but frankly, that's fairly well understood in that domain. So I think we'll see sort of more incremental improvements in that regard, but I'm not convinced there's a big algorithmic innovation waiting to happen still. I mean, if you want to get an example of a effectively perfect computer vision system, go over and look at Waymo in San Francisco. It's a near perfect state of the world. On the sort of decision-making side, again, I think there's sort of reinforcement learning as a concept is pretty well understood, and planning is certainly something that many people are researching. What has been interesting to me across both of those domains is that I think we've run out of places to test and explore what was possible, right? So DeepMind went through a phase of where they basically solved every game they could get their hands on with reinforcement learning. Fantastic. What now? And so I think we're in this point where NLP and language has sort of come up to meet other fields of AI moving backwards. But I don't think we've yet got the right environment from a data perspective to get the learning signal we need. So I don't know where it will come from, but I would be looking for that innovation in areas where you can get some really scalable environment to train AI systems. What that looks like, I have a few ideas, we might be building one of them, but I think a lot of them, particularly the multimodal AI efforts that are going on, will struggle with some kind of data production and environment to get your learning signal from. I think that's the unlock, not what algorithm is used or architecture or anything like that. That will come as a consequence of working out the data and environment.
Are there any further questions? Maybe we'll wrap it up there then. Thank you very much for listening. I think there's a final talk from Cassidy just to wrap things up. No? 1 minute, yeah. So I'll hand over to Cassidy, but thank you very much for coming and listening to us founders feeling sorry for ourselves.